Formula One has reached its summer break, and the sport is heading into that break with 4 separate storylines running at once, each one touching a different corner of the grid. Lewis Hamilton closes out the first half of 2026 carrying a string of penalties that has followed him from Silverstone through Spa and into Hungary. George Russell sits third in the championship, behind a teammate who is 19 years old and already leading the title fight. Ferrari is preparing a technical upgrade for Monza built around a regulation the FIA introduced earlier this season. And Max Verstappen enters the break with a request from Red Bull on record as denied, at a moment when Aston Martin is being rebuilt around one of the sport's most recognizable designers. None of these 4 stories exist in isolation, together they define the silly season heading into the second half of the year. Lewis Hamilton heads into the summer break carrying 4 penalties across 3 race weekends, a false start penalty at Silverstone, a collision penalty at Spa, a grid drop for impeding Oscar Piastri in Hungary qualifying, and a pit lane speeding penalty in the Hungary race itself. 4 separate incidents, 4 separate weekends, and each one has been treated by the stewards as a standalone infraction rather than part of a pattern. But taken together, they form a run of penalties that is difficult to overlook heading into the second half of the season. The qualifying incident in Hungary deserves the closest look, because the details change how the moment reads. Hamilton had set a time just 0.012 seconds off Norris's pole, slowed after crossing the line, and didn't get a radio warning about Piastri's approach in time, blocking him at turn 1. That is a margin of just over 1/100th of a second separating a front-row start from what actually followed. Stewards ruled he had unnecessarily impeded the McLaren and dropped him 3 places, from 2nd to 5th. 3 grid positions, in a sport where qualifying position routinely decides races, is not a minor consequence. Hamilton pushed back afterward, saying he had no idea Piastri was coming through the corner. That detail is central to how several analysts have read the incident since. If Hamilton genuinely had no warning that Piastri was approaching, the failure sits with the radio communication from the pit wall, not with a decision Hamilton made in the cockpit. That reading has shifted some of the conversation away from Hamilton's driving and toward Ferrari's operational execution during the session. 4 penalties in 3 weekends is still 4 penalties in 3 weekends, whatever the explanation behind any single one of them, and that pattern alone keeps the pressure on the team heading into the break. The championship table puts all of this in context. Despite all of it, Hamilton remains second in the championship with 169 points, 50 behind Antonelli. 50 points is a real gap at this stage of the season, but it is not a collapse, and it does not read as a driver who has lost his form. The more pointed question building around Ferrari right now isn't whether Hamilton's driving has deteriorated, it's whether the team around him is costing him results that a driver in second place in the championship shouldn't be losing. A missed radio call that turned a front-row qualifying lap into a 5th-place start is exactly the kind of error that keeps that question in front of the team. George Russell's situation is a quieter kind of pressure, but it has been building since well before the summer break. He sits third in the standings on 160 points, 59 behind his rookie teammate Kimi Antonelli, who at 19 became Formula One's youngest-ever championship leader. A 59-point gap to a 19-year-old teammate in his first season is not a small thing to sit with, regardless of how either driver frames it publicly. It's the kind of internal gap that tends to generate speculation on its own, even without any external prompting. That speculation now has a specific name and a specific team attached to it. Günther Steiner recently said on the Red Flags podcast that Russell is looking around, but the destination he floated was Audi for 2028, not an imminent 2026 or 2027 move, and he even named Carlos Sainz as a rival candidate for that same seat. It's worth being precise about what that actually means. This is not a claim that Russell is leaving Mercedes next season, or even the season after. It's a longer-range storyline about where Russell might sit once his current contract cycle finishes, and Steiner presented it as one possibility among others. He floated Audi, not confirmed it, and named Sainz as competition for the same seat. Russell himself has been direct in shutting down any near-term version of that story. He has said plainly that he will be racing for Mercedes next year and that it isn't even a discussion point. Reports suggest a contract option through 2027 may already be activated, which, if accurate, settles the question of Russell's seat for at least 2 more seasons regardless of what gets floated on a podcast in the meantime. What keeps the broader story alive isn't Audi as a specific destination, it's what Antonelli's rise means for Russell's position inside his current team over the next several years. Team principal Toto Wolff has already floated hypothetical talk of a Verstappen-Antonelli pairing at Mercedes down the line, and that alone is enough to make Russell's longer-term standing worth watching, even with a contract that reportedly runs through 2027. Ferrari's story heading into Monza is more concrete than either of the driver's storylines, and it has nothing to do with bent rules or favorable treatment. It comes down to engine development tokens. Under the FIA's ADUO system, manufacturers who fall behind a performance benchmark are granted development opportunities, and Ferrari earned 2 for 2026. This is a formal mechanism written into the regulations for manufacturers who fall short of a defined performance threshold, not a loophole, and not a special allowance outside the rulebook. Ferrari has already used the first of its 2 allotted tokens. The first, deployed ahead of Austria alongside a new shell fuel compound, added a modest 7 to 8 horsepower. 7 to 8 horsepower is a real gain, but a limited one, useful across a season, not transformative on its own. The second token is where the story becomes significant, and Ferrari has reportedly been saving it for a specific race. The second, reportedly saved for Monza, is the bigger swing, a redesigned turbocharger with new blade geometry aimed at closing a straight-line deficit that opened up after the FIA introduced a 5-second pre-start procedure, which wiped out the advantage of Ferrari's originally smaller turbo. That single regulatory change, the 5-second pre-start procedure, is the reason this upgrade exists at all. It erased an advantage Ferrari had built into its power unit design from the very start of the season, and a redesigned turbocharger focused specifically on straight-line speed is a direct response to that loss. Timing it for Monza, the highest-speed circuit on the calendar, is not a coincidence. It's the one race of the season where a straight-line deficit costs the most. Mercedes is not standing still while Ferrari prepares that upgrade. Mercedes is racing to answer with its own ADUO upgrade at the same race, even though Kimi Antonelli and George Russell have already used all 4 power units allowed this season, meaning a new engine now would mean accepting grid penalties. That is a genuine cost, not a minor technicality. Introducing a new power unit this late in the season means both Mercedes drivers would start Monza from further back on the grid than their pace alone would justify. That Mercedes appears willing to accept that trade-off says something about how seriously the team is treating Ferrari's turbocharger upgrade. There is also a question of motive attached to the Monza upgrade that is worth addressing directly, because it has been raised publicly. Journalist Ralph Bach's comment that F1 officials want Ferrari to look good at their home race is really about optics in front of an expected crowd of over 300,000 fans, not about any suggestion of favorable treatment from the FIA. In other words, the interest in Ferrari performing well at Monza is about the scale of the crowd attending its home race, not about the governing body adjusting the technical rules in Ferrari's favor. Max Verstappen's situation is the murkiest of the 4 stories, but it rests on something that has actually been confirmed rather than pure speculation. Red Bull denied a request from Verstappen at Silverstone, and that alone has kept exit speculation alive amid an underperforming car. The specific nature of that request has not been made public, but the refusal itself, combined with a car that has not been consistently competitive this season, has been enough to keep exit rumors circulating through the summer break. One part of the broader Verstappen story is fully confirmed and involves a different team entirely. Adrian Newey is now Aston Martin's team principal, shaping the team around a high-rake aerodynamic philosophy that trades stronger mid-corner downforce for greater sensitivity to ride height changes. That is a real, stated technical direction, not speculation about a hypothetical, a philosophy built around extracting more downforce through the middle of a corner, at the cost of making the car more sensitive to how it sits relative to the track surface. That technical direction is precisely why Verstappen's name keeps getting linked to Aston Martin in the first place. A team being rebuilt from its foundations by one of the sport's most successful designers naturally draws speculation about which drivers could eventually be brought in to drive it. But the driver most directly connected to that project has already pushed back on the specific idea of Verstappen joining him there. Fernando Alonso has downplayed the idea of ever being Verstappen's teammate there, calling the links good publicity for the team but a move unlikely. If Verstappen does eventually leave Red Bull, the more turnkey option remains Mercedes, based on Wolff's recent comments about the team's future driver plans. That would leave Verstappen weighing two very different paths heading toward a decision: a proven, front-running team in Mercedes, against a longer-term project at Aston Martin built entirely around Newey's aerodynamic philosophy and the uncertainty that comes with a team still finding its competitive footing under new leadership.